All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to July 30th edition of the MakerDAO community call. We do this call every week on Tuesdays. My name is David. I am the community development lead here at MakerDAO, and I facilitate these calls. So if you don't know about these calls already, we use them to pretty much go over what's been happening in the MakerDAO universe for like the last week, right? So we go over everything from governance milestones, governance events, technical milestones, partnerships, podcasts and videos, things like that. We also go over the stuff that's been happening in the Maker blog. We go over highlights from the community, stuff developers have been creating around Dai, cool articles that came out, cool threads that have been happening, even events. And every once in a while, we have a guest. And today we do have a guest, Mr. Wouter Kampmann, who's the head of engineering here at MakerDAO. And he's going to talk a bit about security for multi-collateral Dai. So we're going to devote the first maybe 20-30 minutes to this topic. So if you guys have been following along, the Maker blog actually came out with a blog post announcing the public bug bounty program. So to give you guys a link to that, I'll just post it in the chat. But again, if you are not able to join the call and you're listening after the fact, in the thread, I'll post a link to the agenda, so you'll be able to find any links that I talk about here. So here, let me give me just a sec. All right, cool. So before we launch into everything, we're gonna kind of dive straight into the guest portion. So hey, Wouter, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, definitely. Yes, hi everyone. So I'm Wouter Kampmann. I'm the head of engineering here at Maker. Yeah, I've been working with Maker now since I believe November 2017, so quite a while. And yeah, I'm here on the call to talk a little bit about the security roadmap that we released last week, I believe. And obviously, we also have a lot of people from the team I see on the call. So if there are questions or comments, then we're very happy to dive into that.
Right on. So, so just a few questions about the bug bounty program. So I noticed that it's going to be existing indefinitely. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means that even after the launch of MCD, even as we add new elements to the system through our governance processes, the bug bounty program will just continue. And of course, there is a very good reason for that, because basically there already is a bug bounty program for single collateral Dai, right? If you can crack the system and you can steal the collateral, that's a pretty high bug bounty. So yeah, it's in everyone's interest, I believe, to have this program, have it continue as the system is live as well, so that we, if there are any issues with the system, that we learn about it rather than have to learn about it through an actual hack. That would be pretty bad.
Right. So before we were able to come out with like the public version of the bug bounty program, what were some of the steps that had to happen? Because I know a lot of people were anxious for the last few months about a bug bounty program. They were kind of wondering what's taking us so long. Like, what do you think? Like, not what do you think, but what were kind of the essential steps before a program like this should have been launched?
The most important thing is that the team felt comfortable that, at least internally, we already did all the necessary checks and yeah, ran all the security checks that we wanted from our side, right? Because I mean, it would be a shame to launch a program like this and then have a hacker find something that we would easily have been able to weed out ourselves and have to pay a high bug bounty for it. So, and obviously the security checks, the auditing, our internal work for that, it only happens after development. So you need some time before that is finished. And it's only then that it actually makes sense to launch this public program, and that's what we did.
Nice. So, so I know that at MakerDAO, like we put a huge emphasis on formal verification of our smart contracts and kind of putting them through this like rigorous, mathematical, even method of totally wiping out entire classes of bugs. Besides formal verification, what other kinds of like checks and security procedures are like typical?
Yeah, so formal verification is an extremely important element, but it's very, very important that you realize the limitations of it, because otherwise it could create this very false sense of security. And what formal verification actually does, it's tremendously important, but it's very focused on the low-level functioning of the system. So when you write a smart contract in Solidity, you have to compile it down to VM code, to byte code, and that's what the nodes actually execute. And the quote unquote only thing, it's a huge thing, but the only thing that formal verification does is it makes sure that the intention as expressed in the high level language is actually the behavior of the low level bytecode, and that there is no secondary behavior, no additional behavior that's actually in the bytecodes. So when you realize that, then it's obvious that there are a lot more things to add to that. Definitely because formal verification is limited to single transactions, and so it's on a very local level. So you can imagine that you can exploit vulnerabilities in the system that actually are more advanced, that involve multiple transactions, and that's something that you wouldn't catch with formal verification. So another thing is the actual logic, the business logic of the system. The only thing that formal verification does is it tells you that the intention expressed in the high-level code is what is executed, but it doesn't tell you anything if that intention is actually correct, if that if there is a correct understanding of the behavior in the system on that level. So that's why you typically would want to combine it with other forms of more traditional security audits. Checking the business logic, checking also the higher level abstractions that span multiple transactions. And we did that with the external auditors, the independent external auditors that we have now contracted. So one of them, runtime verification, they will actually build on top of the formal verification models that we have, because our models, they run, as I mentioned, on the local level. And you can actually apply formal verification on the higher level, on the logic, and that's what they will do. So they will build this higher level logic, this logic model of the system, and run formal verification on that level as well. So that's one thing. In the article, I compared it to unit testing versus integration testing. We showed the article to the people from runtime verification. They told us that the analogy is not quite exact, but I think from a normal user point of view, that's what you can compare it to. The second thing is the audit by Trail of Bits, and Trail of Bits, they are a very valuable partner in this because they have been working with us since the beginning, basically, right? So single collateral Dai, and then throughout the first audit as well that we did some time back on the first version of the code for multi-collateral Dai. And now that we do have formal verification on these two levels, Trail of Bits will be focusing especially on the aspects that are not covered by formal verification. So they understand very well the limitations of it, and so they will be focusing on the higher level logic of the system and do an audit for that. And then the third company is actually a Chinese security company, a newcomer in the industry, and they are very eager to read through the contracts and also have as a second pair of eyes on these the logic of the system and the more traditional aspects of security audits that we'll be doing. And there are even more things, like, for example, when you everything that we've now discussed is based on the code of the contracts, right? But even if your code is without errors, then you still could make some mistake in, for example, deploying and configuring the system. And that's one more check that we'll do to make sure that we have automated verification of the system that is deployed to make sure that it actually that it is what we expect it to be, and that the parameters that are configured are have the right values, and especially for permissions and authorization. So, and I think if you combine all that, then you've pretty much covered it.
Gotcha. Thank you. That was a really, really great answer. So all right. So this bug bounty program, it was opened up privately in early June, right, to like a handful of select researchers, and now it's public. And with the public one, I think the maximum bounty is, I think, 50,000 for a critical bug, and that's like super clearly defined on the HackerOne.com page, where we actually list all the details for the bounty program. But do you see the bounty for the critical bug increasing? How do you guys set the amount for the rewards for bug bounties?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So actually, there are two things to consider, right? So it's the bug bounty amount, but also the scope of the program, and both will be increasing. So currently, we started with the scope that includes the core contracts, and then some of the most important additional contracts, such as the auctions, for example. Now, there are a lot of contracts currently that aren't in scope yet, because what I said in the beginning, which is that we haven't finalized our own security checks. So we will be adding to that scope as we progress and our own audits progress. The bug bounty amount. So there are three ways that we actually calculated this, and and in the end, it's much more an art than a science. But one way to look at it is the potential damage that you can mitigate by having these programs, and obviously that one, if you calculate like the damage that you could avoid by catching a bug that would otherwise be exploited in the production environment, that's potential. That's millions and millions of dollars, right? So that's huge. The second way of looking at it is simply from a kind of competitive point of view for the hackers, for the researchers. So these hackers, they will be working on some projects anyway, right? So the question is, from their point of view, what project do they invest their time in? And obviously, they will invest their time in the projects that they think have the highest chance of them actually finding a bug. Then multiplied by what that bug on average would actually what it would pay out for. So that's the second calculation we did, and then the third calculation is simply from an hourly rate point of view. If, as a security researcher, if you work on this and given a certain probability that you find a bug, and then a certain probability that it's actually, like, for example, a critical bug, would you then actually end up with an acceptable hourly rate in the end? Mm-hmm. Once again, statistically speaking, or not? And we run these three models, and ultimately, so what we ended up with is you have a high range of potential strategies and bug bounty amounts that you could apply. And currently, as the system is not live yet, and the scope is still quite small, we're mostly playing on the competitive edge, right? So the 50K is not as high as you might expect for if you, let's say, combine it to the value that's locked up in a production system. Since everything is already formally verified, the chances might be quite small that you actually find something at this point. But from a competitive point of view, we're already in the range of our competitors. So it's already quite attractive at this point to join the program, knowing that it will continue indefinitely. So the time that you invest as a researcher is not lost if you don't find a bug, let's say, before MCD launch. You can use that knowledge to find other bugs later. And our intention is to increase the amounts. and yeah, really drive it to the point where we have the level of engagement that we would want for a product that needs to be as secure as Maker.
Got it. Thanks. So, did I hear correctly that like all the contracts in the current scope of the bug bounty program are formally verified?
Actually, I'm not too certain about that. The scope that we currently start with is one that the team feels comfortable about, that we have properly checked. Now, I would need to look at, for example, the adapter contracts. So the adapter contracts, the collateral adapter contracts, gem join, and so on, they have not been formally verified yet to the extent that is possible, because this is actually a type of contract that you run into the limitations of formal verification. And the reason is that these adapter contracts, that they connect to these external systems, right, to the external collateral contracts. So that would basically mean, if you want to fully cover the behavior of the adapter contract, that you would have to include the entire behavior of the system that's connected to it. So if we're talking about the bad contracts, for example, then you would actually have to formally verify those as well. And even like that's practically not feasible, and then might not even be possible, because the first step for formal verification is that you actually write your contracts in a way that you facilitate formal verification. That was one of the starting principles on which we based the development of the MCD contracts. So yeah, that's where we run into the limitations of formal verification. And for this contract, it's extra important that they are checked and that they are included in the bug bounty program. So we already reviewed them ourselves, and yeah, they are already included, even though we cannot fully formally verify them.
So no matter what, there's always going to be some certain level of risk at the adapter level, because, you know, to have the adapters formally verified, they also have to formally verify the ERC20, the unique ERC20 contract of that particular collateral, right? Okay.
Yes, and the entire system that's connected to it, right? And that really, there is no end to the complexity that might include.
Do you see, well, so you're saying it's very hard to actually formally verify this kind of code if it's not initially created based on like that kind of standard prepared for formal verification, which I think, if I remember correctly, it's called the K framework, right? The K lab or K framework, right?
Yeah, that's the formal verification framework that we're working with, yeah.
Do you see like the, I guess, the development of formal verification to like be able to cover all smart contracts in the future? I know this is kind of a more like far-reaching existential question, but do you see that ever happening, even like long time frames?
That's a very hard question to answer. I think, like, could we do it theoretically? Obviously we can, right? Because it's a matter of, I mean, if you make it a principle that you do not, like, for example, as the Ethereum community evolves, and we together we take this decision that we won't tolerate any contracts that will not be formally verified, then we can do that, right? We can set that standard. But I do think that it's a matter of, yeah, it's really a trade-off. So Maker is a system with a very high, with a lot of value locked up in it. So obviously the standard there should be as high as possible, and we have that standard, right? So we actually committed to deploy or formally verifying all the contracts that we can formally verify within what is technically feasible. But for other systems, it might not make sense to really maintain that level of security, because the value that's locked up in the system might not really be worth it. And I think you will always have the mix of the two. What will happen is that it will probably get easier as we maybe switch to other programming languages to express the logic of smart contracts. That might mean huge improvements in terms of what you can formally verify and how much you can push automation. So there is definitely a lot of room to grow there. But even with that, I do think that there will always be cases where it's not actually worth it to formally verify it.
Nice, nice. By the way, anybody in the call, feel free to ask Wouter questions. I'm kind of just spitballing my own questions, but feel free to jump in. Yeah, cool. So since the bug bounty program will be continuing indefinitely, and that maximum bounty amount is also going to increase as the risk of loss increases, right? Like it's going to be a lot more on mainnet at MCD than it is right now, as you know, not all the contracts are launched. It's on Kovan. So my question is, who funds that? Like I know existentially the community is expecting that the foundation winds down after the launch of MCD. So do you have any insight into how, for example, this bug bounty program would be funded maybe 50, 100 years out? Like, would it be governance funding it? Would it be some other special purpose entity? Or do you not know?
Yeah, that would be really speculative, right? But
Yeah.
I think specifically for the bug bounty program, it's hard to say. But if you put it a little bit broader and talk about security in general, I think that's just part of what we need to figure out as part of the governance process within the community, how we organize that. I alluded a little bit to it earlier. I think it's a matter of setting your standards to agree as a community what is necessary from a security point of view. And then really apply all the tricks that you have for funding open source projects, right? So I think it will very much be a mix of commercial companies just paying for pieces of it because they benefit from it. So, for example, the collateral adapters, that's very obvious. Like if you have a token that you want to have included as collateral, then you might find a corporation that is actually happy to pay for that, right? And if you set that security standard as a community, then they know the bar they have to meet. So it's that's one example. Other things that have more to do with the core system, I think as we add additional upgrades to the system, there will be a lot of variation in like the size of the upgrades. The smaller upgrades that might actually be the most critical ones, I think will be scrutinized and verified by the community. That won't be a problem. The larger additions, for those we might want to put the process in place. For example, a maker improvement proposal process that will combine the process of gathering the requirements, seeking the right party to execute, to implement the functionality, and then once again adhere to your security standard and include that as part of the package that needs to be delivered. So I think it's really just a subsection of the much bigger question of how you can maintain development and secure development in an open source community as Ethereum.
Yeah, that's a really great point. That's a really great point. It all kind of transitions into that whole open source community driven effort. So there's a question in the chat from Jordan Last. Do any of these languages that will make formally verifying smart contracts available yet? When would these languages be available? Are you referring to languages that will be possible on the EWASM virtual machine?
Yes. Well, so next to Solidity, you already have Viper, right? So that's one language that's actually already available. That is more, that is more easily formally verifiable, and it really boils down to design decisions on language levels, such as type safety and similar ones. So I definitely would like to see more research into that, because I think that the community would tremendously benefit from a language that has, for example, stricter type conditions than Solidity, which basically has none. So when would these languages be available? This is an ongoing thing. There are some available already, and I'm sure that we'll do a lot more research. And yeah, So switching to EWASM, that one, it might benefit us because as we start using this more generic framework, basically, more tools might be readily available. So we use one formal verification framework, but if you start using a virtual machine execution language that actually is also used outside of the context of Ethereum, then a lot more tools become available. So that might be a boost, and yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Yes. So let me just read the questions out loud so the audio catches it. Frank had one, but I'm gonna just ask Jordan's first since it's connected to what you just answered. For example, would Rust compiled to WASM be better for formal verification? And it's nice that WebAssembly itself is formally verified, right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, and I think so. One crucial aspect here is that we verify on the bytecode level, right? And this is apparently maybe contradictory to the high level language requirement that we said. Why does the high level language even matter when we formally verify on the bytecode level anyway? And the reason is automation and is the compilation process and basically that entire translation step.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and it's exactly as you say. So WebAssembly itself is already formally verified. So that kind of puts one basic building block in place. If you have a language that actually has a compiler that is formally verified, for example, then you can look at the higher level constraints, so the constraints on the level of the higher level language, and that might open a lot more information that you have, which allows more automation, and which also it shrinks the design space, right? So as a developer, you cannot do certain things that are inherently unsafe. Mm-hmm. So I have to say I'm not really certain about Rust in particular, but even though we do formal verification on the bytecode level, all these other aspects also matter a lot in terms of automation, in terms of performance, and in terms of constraints on the design space in the first place. Yes.
All right. Cool. So I'm gonna do two more questions. I'm gonna do Frank's, and then I'm gonna give one more on my own, and then we're gonna cut it short, even though this is a really, really wonderful conversation. So Frank asks, if there are performance issues with formal verification, will there be a centralized kill switch in MCD to stop all activity if a hack is detected?
I think the two parts of the question are only loosely related, right? So formal verification definitely has its performance issues, right? So if you write, for example, a traditional unit test, the unit test will just run in the background, and as a developer, you kind of have this continuous confirmation that the code that you've written didn't break any tests. That's the kind of testing or like the development workflow that you definitely cannot do with formal verification because of the performance issue. So you actually have to run a very, very beefy continuous integration server and have your proofs run on that. And even then, it takes hours and hours to complete, right? So the CI reports that are generated, they are the output of a very, very performant machine running for many hours. And it's a matter of adapting your development process and just make sure that you can take that into account. We are currently looking into parallelization as a way to tackle that, but yeah, there still is a lot more to be done there. And then the question if there will be kill switches in MCD to stop activity if a hack is detected. Yes, so there are, the way that the system is designed is that there are a number of, so delays, working with delays, for example, is a very potent tool to reduce risk like that. So, but the trick really is that you have to look at specific cases and see for each of these cases what is the best defense against it. So delays might especially be useful for everything that happens on the governance layer, and that might go wrong on the governance layer. If you build in, if you then build in that delay before changes are actually applied, then yeah, you can monitor the system and then actually stop any action that would have yeah, tremendous I don't know, damaging effects. On other levels, for example, yeah, let's say that in the very core of the system something is wrong, if there is a vulnerability there, then still you might want to really narrow down that scope. So for example, could be that there is a problem with a particular collateral type. In that case, you want to shut down, you want to set the debt ceiling to 0, or maybe even like pass a proposal that would set the collateralization level or a requirement to 0, so that all the CDPs for that particular collateral type are immediately liquidated. That's another defense mechanism. And
you can do it at a 0% penalty at the same time, so that users don't actually incur like a penalty, right?
Yeah,
if it's really
yeah,
like
exactly.
because of a vulnerability.
Yes, and one of the, so I talked about like additional measures on top of formal verification, right? But what I'm currently talking about, looking at these specific attack vectors and then have a scenario that you know how to react in all these different cases. So that's actually the kind of threat modeling that's part of our security roadmap that wasn't even mentioned in the blog, but that we're currently also looking into. So yes.
Nice. And so the answer, the short answer is no. There's no centralized kill switch. There's the OSM, the Oracle Security Module, which is a delay, the Governance Security Module, which is a delay, and then there is the Emergency Shutdown cage, which is just governance's way to kind of deal with very, very, very serious vulnerabilities or attacks against the system. So cool. I have one more question for you, Wouter, that I really want to ask, even though we're over time. So I also read in the bug bounty announcement that there is the 4th track is an integration partner program to test MCD in collaboration with like our closest partners in a realistic environment. Can you just talk a bit about that? Like, what's the scope of that? When does that begin? Like, just yeah.
Yes, this really is something that we need to do in order to prepare our integration partners and business partners for the launch of MCD, because the security concerns don't end at the boundaries of our own system, right? So if you have, for example, an integration partner who implements an integration that contains some critical vulnerability, then that's just as much a menace to the system as vulnerabilities that are within the MCD system. So you really have to be careful that you inform your integration and business partners so that they properly integrate with the MCD system. And integration also has this additional challenge that it's really hard to simulate this. So you can do this on the Coven test network, you can do this in a QA environment, but ultimately, because you have these multiple systems that interact, it's an art to get as close as possible to the production environment. So it's an additional track that is designed to address concerns like that.
Nice, thanks. All right, well, I appreciate you coming on the call a lot. I know you're active all the time on Rocket Chat and you're readily available, generally speaking. So is there anything you want to tell the developer community in general or anything like that?
I guess what you would expect. I would definitely want everyone to participate in the bug bounty program. So also, if you know people who might be interested, let them know. And yeah, just be aware that the bug bounty program will be running indefinitely, and that we will be increasing the amounts. So yeah, you shouldn't feel demotivated if you feel that it's a lot of investment of your time, and that the chances of actually finding something with all the other security checks in place are pretty small. So whatever time you invest in learning the intricacies of the contracts and the system, they will pay off later if when we increase the scope and the amounts. So I would just encourage everyone to participate.
Got it. And are we hiring anybody currently for the engineering side of things?
Yes, so we're actually there are multiple positions that are open currently. So we're looking for a software architect, someone who has a background in smart contract development, and but is able to work on a higher level. So work with stakeholders to figure out requirements, and then work with the teams to make sure that we have the best possible technical implementations. And then we're still hiring for 2 additional smart contract developers in our team. So if you know any candidates, please send them to our website, and we'll happily talk to them.
Right on. All right. Thanks, Wouter. Appreciate you coming on the call, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And,
Always. All
see
right.
you again
Cool.
soon.
So the next portion of the call, we're gonna go through all the stuff that's going on this week. So I hope you enjoyed that, because I did. Definitely learned a bunch from Wouter. He is the man. So before I go on, just a reminder: feel free to interrupt me at any point. Questions are welcome. But I'm gonna go through kind of the usual agenda that we do every week. So first, we're gonna go through some governance stuff. This week, we had our usual Thursday governance and risk call. We posted a written summary of that as well. And I think that if you've been following governance and Maker, you'll know that we created a forum website on Discourse. So the URL is super simple. It's like all of the other Maker front ends. Instead of cdp.makerdao.com, it's just forum.makerdao.com. And so it'll link you to pretty much our new forum, where we're focusing all of our discussions, all of our posts, all of the current issues in governance. You could find all of them in that forum. So we're going to be posting mostly everything there, and no longer on the MKR Gov subreddit. So as for votes this week, on Friday we had a vote put up for a decrease of the stability fee by 200 basis points, which is 2%, down to 18.5% per year. So currently, there was earlier in the weekend around 26K voting for the current proposal, but the legacy proposal had 78,000 Maker blocking it. So if you don't know much about Maker voting, executive votes run on a continuous voting system. So the way that it works is any new proposal needs more MKR in it than the legacy proposal, and I'm totally simplifying this a little bit, to pass. So currently, for a proposal to pass, it has to beat 78,000 MKR. But at the same time, by the time it hits like 40,000 MKR, maybe like 30,000 of that MKR moved from the old proposal. So really, like, as more people engage in the voting system, the scales shift, and I'd realistically see something like 50K MKR needed, assuming that some of the MKR from the legacy proposal moves. But yeah, so currently we're still sitting at 20.5%. And since today is Tuesday, if you guys are already used to the cadence, you'll know that yesterday a governance poll came out. So governance polls are a way that Maker Governance seeks soft consensus from MKR holders. So basically, it just informs what the next executive vote is going to be. And so this yesterday, we launched a poll. It has 9 options to change the stability fee. You could vote for options between 16.5% to 24.5%. The vote ends on Thursday at 4 p.m. UTC, or 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Pretty much Thursday at the same time that this call starts, right? And so right now, it looks like the governance poll is showing a winning vote for 18.5%, which is actually the same thing as the executive vote that's running. So looks like the community is still in agreement that the rates should be lowered a little bit. And you could see that over the past few days, at least the peg has been trading a bit above $1, which means that the rates should maybe be decreased. But regardless, that's it for the votes. We had a couple of cool things happen in the discussion around maker governance. So Matthew Rabinowitz posted his almost weekly narrative on MakerDAO, and he talked a bunch about how InstantApps. Well, he covered a lot of topics, but the highlights are that refinance is super healthy. With this launch of the InstantApp Compound Bridge, we saw a whole ton of Dai being refinanced from Maker to Compound, which actually brought down the total supply, and it kind of closed the gap of oversupply. So right now we're seeing a way more a market way closer to like the reality of the supply and demand of Dai in general. He also talked a bit about the impending change for how we handle stability fee changes in multi-collateral Dai. He talked about the fact that scaling MakerDAO also involves things like what Fluidity has done this week, and I'll mention a bit about that later. But they created kind of a white paper and a method to introduce tokenized securities to protocols, and that includes MakerDAO, but it's not exclusive to MakerDAO. But regardless, they're testing this with treasury bills, which would be really, really cool to have on MakerDAO. And sorry, my voice is a little bit messed up today. So he definitely read his narrative. It's always definitely informative. It's probably a 15-minute read, probably less if you're quicker than reading than I am. Besides that, we have our governance at a glance thread updated. So governance at a glance is a thread that's upkept by a user that goes by the name of Long for Wisdom. And so 2 new things were added there this week, including a new category called Current Affairs. And so this week we saw kind of not a vulnerability, but a potential issue that needed to be addressed in the voting system. So the basic problem was that as Maker voters, like as the system lives on, more and more Maker voters might potentially die, become inactive. Like you don't know. So whenever a Maker voter leaves their MKR in an old proposal and doesn't move it, if there's a lot of stuck MKR on one proposal, that might create basically an unintended minimum quorum for future votes. And so the community suggested that this kind of like they suggested a few different fixes for this kind of vulnerability, and that thread covers it. And I think actually Chris said that it's this whole thing is basically fixed in the next version of the chief that's going to be in MCD. But if you want to dig deeper into it, I link the thread in the agenda for this call, which you could find on the forum thread for this call, and also on the current agenda for the current community meeting, because that agenda doc has all the old agendas basically down below. So you could just scroll down and look for the date of this meeting, and you could see what I'm talking about. But the thread is there. Besides that, there's also the question of creating a community managed Twitter account called @MKRGov to keep Maker holders updated and involved in regards to governance. So this is something that everybody has kind of been thinking about solutions around, which is how do you get MKR holders to be informed about stuff that's happening in Maker governance. And this is kind of one effort to do that. So Quadratics, he grabbed the @MKRGov handle on Twitter. And the idea right now is to create a bot similar to how, what is it, Maker CDP bot, or there's this really famous Maker bot on Twitter. But basically have a bot announce when votes proposals come up, and then also have kind of manual input for interesting threads and discussions, and just have a Maker governance Twitter handle. Yeah, MakerDAI. That's right, MakerDAI. Mark, the founder's in the call. He thank you for the correction, Mark. Appreciate it. Yeah, MakerDAI. It's a great bot, and so yeah, hopefully we can have something like that for governance as well to kind of combat voter apathy and try to increase engagement with MKR holders. So that's about it for governance. I'm gonna jump into some partners and integrations this week. The most exciting one, in my opinion, is Fluidity. So they introduced something called the Token Asset Portfolio, and it's basically a model to leverage real-world assets in DeFi credit facilities. So they put out a white paper, and it's basically you know a construction for how to handle real world assets, tokenize them, uh, and also have recourse, right? And also have like all the things necessary to actually use them in a protocol like MakerDAO. So definitely read through that. It's super exciting. I think they did their first pilot transaction on Koban, so to prove that this kind of construction works. So if you're interested in that, check it out. We also had another wallet integration, Everx. They're a Thailand-based wallet, and they implemented the Dai token. We also have a couple of layer 2 organizations that I guess made themselves compatible with Dai. So Tokamak Network partners with MakerDAO. I think they're a Korean layer 2 solution. They use Plasma to like make zero fee payments with Dai. I think they're pretty similar to Connects and like all those guys. So we're seeing a lot of layer 2 stuff, which is really exciting to me. And then the other layer 2 one is Matic Network. So uh, they have Dai as the first token supported on their Plasma enabled Matic side chains. So that's exciting. I hope to see pretty cool stuff built out of these things. Yeah, that's about it for partners and integrations. From the Maker blog, we already covered all the bug bounty stuff. So rewind the recording if you're listening in and you want to catch details on that. So yeah, now I'm gonna jump quickly for the last 10 minutes of the call into highlights from the community and some real life events. So if you've been checking out the Maker subreddit, we saw that Callisto Network is voluntarily on their own performing a security audit on the Dai smart contract, which is pretty cool. They announced it earlier this week, and I think they're going to be announcing the results in like another week or two, if I'm not mistaken. Pooled together, their third pool has closed, and they have a third winner. And it's really exciting to see lossless lotteries. I don't have access to participating in one, but Pool Together is here, and now I can participate in one. And it's really freaking cool. But they're opening their fourth now. It's going to be the last one on their current infrastructure, and they're going to be upgrading their entire project. And they have a blog post that I will link here that talks a bit about it. But this is going to be the last pool for this kind of construction, and the next one is going to be even cooler with cooler features. I think they're going to do stuff like rollover, where if you bought a ticket, you don't have to like withdraw and then repurchase tickets for the next pool. You could just click an opt-in option where if you didn't win, it just rolls over and you wait for the next pool. And you could do this at infinite amounts of times, presumably. But yeah, so that's exciting. It's cool to see them making progress. We also saw a really interesting developer creation that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. It's called Die Hard, and it's a borderless, unkillable crypto fiat gateway. And it uses this really interesting game theory that I'm still kind of a skeptic of because I don't fully understand it. But it involves basically the purchaser of the Dai for fiat to lock a third of the value of the trade in Dai. And yeah, I'm not going to try to explain it because I don't fully understand it myself, but check it out. It's really, really interesting. You could tell a ton of work has been put into it. So it's definitely worth investigating and reading about. And I'm going to try to get the guy, I think his name is, let me not mess this up. I'll tell you what his name is right now. Yeah, Logan. I'm gonna try to get Logan on the call to in one of these coming Tuesdays to talk about it and to so we could dive into what this thing is and if it actually is legit. So yeah, that's it for developer creations. And in the agenda, I linked an article about the game theory and also like a video example of the actual interface and like how it actually works. So they did a really great video kind of narrating the buyer side and then narrating the seller side and showing you how the whole thing works. So yeah. As for articles and threads, so articles I saw like a few notable ones. I only put three. When will we see a DeFi bank? So this was a pretty cool sort of think piece. But the funny thing is, we kind of already have a DeFi bank. I mean, if you look at Instadap, I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to integrate all of these different DeFi protocols under one user interface, under one app, right? And it kind of functions like a bank, you know. But besides that, there was also this two-part series on crypto credit and lending platforms, whether your funds are safe. So part one goes into all the decentralized credit and lending platforms, and then part two goes into all the centralized credit and lending platforms. So, you know, as DeFi grows, as DeFi becomes a thing, a lot of consumers are going to be exposed to these new financial options that they didn't have before. And it's really important for users to be educated on the risks around their funds being used in these different protocols and companies. And it's important to explain to users that they need to differentiate between even a simple differentiation between decentralized and centralized solutions for this is it's huge because it's just two different kinds of risks and you have to be cognizant of what you're risking, right? So yeah, I thought those two articles were in very good taste and very important. So there was one thread. Well, there was one type of thread that has been super popular this week on the subreddit, and I thought it's very important to kind of call it out and address it. So, following the Coinbase Earn program for the CDPs, we saw a ton of people not figuring out how to close their CDPs. And the basic reason for it is because the second you open a CDP, even with the smallest amount, uh, because your interest is basically accruing block by block, uh, you have to have some extra Dai and you have to have some Ether to basically pay back your loan and close out the CDP. And a lot of people kind of got stuck on that and were worried, what do I do about my penny of debt? Will I be in debt forever? And from what I see, the majority of people have kind of figured it out. Uh, but it just goes to show that when you run a tutorial, it's important to kind of to be cognizant of what might be an additional step that users would appreciate. And I don't mean that to throw shade at Coinbase. I think that it was a totally awesome tutorial. But nevertheless, users, don't worry. If you are having issues with that, just come in our Rocket Chat or our subreddit, and somebody will be there to help. Or look at the hundred of other threads, or not hundred, maybe the dozen other threads that are already there, and you might find your answer. So yeah, so that's about it for all the community stuff and all the stuff that's been going on in MakerDAO. For events this week, yeah, we don't have too many this week actually. Actually, I don't think we have. Where was it? Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so only one event within this week, and it's in South Korea in Seoul. And our man Du from business development is going to be there. So it's a MakerDAO and Beam community meetup. And besides that, we're going to be participating in two bigger events in the coming months. Berlin Blockchain Week is coming up in a couple weeks. That's from the 19th to the 28th of August. I will be there. So if you're there, hit me up and we can get coffee and talk about Maker. And yeah, we could synergize. Also, we're going to be participating in Osaka in October from the 8th to the 11th. That's DevCon 5. And more details will roll out about that closer we come to October. So yeah, that's about it. And we're 4 minutes to the hour, and I covered everything in the agenda. I'm happy. So I'm going to open up to you guys if you have any questions, if you guys have any topics you want to cover. Feel free to speak up or type in chat. Cool. If there's nothing, we can end the call a couple minutes early. Sweet.
I was going to. The only question I had on there was related to the DSR. If we have a known portal for it.
At the moment, there's no known public portal for it, but I know that there will be. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Sweet. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming as usual. See you guys next Tuesday.
Thanks.
Thank you.